Welcome back. We are going to talk about the three-act structure now and the hero's journey. These are so important because they provide a foundational structure for your story. They have also been around for dozens, hundreds of years. I know I haven't used definitive language in this course because it's your screenplay, your story, your career. You can do whatever you want. But you should learn the three-act structure and the hero's journey because it is so foundational. Basically, almost every one of your favorite movies, books, stories throughout history have used the three-act structure. Also, they teach it in film school, and even if you don't go to film school, you know who does? The readers who are going to go through your scripts, producers, actors, directors. They know the three-act structure. They are looking for the three-act structure in your script. Sometimes you'll get notes and they'll even mention the midpoint came at the wrong time that they were expecting, or Act 1 was running too long. So even if you don't personally plan on using this, you should definitely learn how it works. And honestly, maybe you'll come around to the idea of using it because like I said, there are some stories occasionally that don't follow the architecture of the three-act structure or the hero's journey, but they are super super rare. All right, so I have it all laid out for you on the screen, but the shortcut version of the three-act structure is this. Act 1 is the day-to-day shit of your main character's life. Act 2 is like what I like to call shit gets real. And then Act 3 is shit gets resolved. Again, so day to day shit, shit gets real, shit gets resolved. The more professional way of saying that, here we go. Act 1, the setup. It says approximately 1 to 30 pages. But here's the thing, the three-act structure has been around for so long that over time attention spans have gotten far shorter. Um, if you can, you're better off making Act 1 15 or 20 pages. The quicker that you can get to Act 2, the better. Obviously, you do not want to rush or hurry your story too much, but it is far better if you can kind of slide on in or crash into Act 2 before page 30 in these modern times. But here we go. Act 1, the setup. Introduction establishes the protagonist's ordinary world, introduces key characters, and sets the tone. So the day-to-day stuff that your main character is going through, what is their everyday life consist of. Then, inciting incident, an event that disrupts the protagonist's world and presents a problem or goal. I will go through like different examples of all these things. I'll just go through the full three acts and then come back to it later. Plot point 1, which is the end of Act 1 and slides you into Act 2. The protagonist commits to the journey, accepting the challenge and moving into the world of Act 2. Then, Act 2, the confrontation. It says 30 to 90 pages. A lot of this is variable on how long your script is going to be. For example, if it's 90 pages or 120 pages, the length of Act 2 is going to vary. But in general, Act 2 is going to be between about 60 to 90 pages of your script. It is going to be the longest act in your story by far. It's probably going to be double the length of Act 1 and Act 3 combined. So it is the bulk of the story. It is also the point where a lot of scripts kind of really fizzle out. A lot of people can write really amazing Act 1s and endings, but they kind of get lost in the middle. So your Act 2 starts with the rising action. The protagonist faces escalating obstacles and conflicts as they pursue their goal, often encountering allies and enemies. Then the midpoint, it is named for this because it is the exact middle of your story. A major turning point occurs, often a revelation or significant event that raises the stakes and changes the protagonist's approach. Like I said, the reason it's the midpoint is it is the actual middle of your story. So if you have a 90-page script, your midpoint will probably fall about 45 pages in, between 40 and 50 pages into your screenplay. Sometimes, if your story is 120 pages, your midpoint will probably fall around page 60. Basic math kind of stuff. But sometimes it's like 50 pages in, or 55 or 65. But it is the general midpoint of the middle of your script. Then you reach the end of Act 2, which is the low point / crisis. The protagonist faces apparent defeat or a major setback, leading to a moment of despair before the final push. That is the end of Act 2, taking you to Act 3, which is shit gets resolved, the resolution. Your climax, which is the ultimate confrontation, where your protagonist faces the main antagonist and resolves the central conflict of your story. And then falling action resolution is basically kind of your wrap up scene after your big climax, which could be a battle or big moment. Falling action and resolution can sometimes be lumped together, but falling action is loose ends are tied up, showing the immediate aftermath of the climax. Resolution and the new equilibrium of your character's life. A new normal is established, reflecting the protagonist's transformation and the story's final outcome. The interesting thing about Act 3 is that the length of it can change dramatically. I've seen some Act 3s that are as short as like 10 pages. Some of them are like 45 pages. It kind of depends on the climactic scene or battle. If it's like 30 pages, like a huge action scene, then Act 3 could be huge because the climax takes up like 30 minutes of that. But if you have a more kind of conventional story, sometimes your climax can be one scene that's like 3 or 4 pages. So that's why Act 3 can be a variable in length by so much. A lot of superhero movies and action movies have like a monster Act 3. That, like I said, sometimes it's like a half an hour action scene. The hero's journey is basically the 3-act structure with more steps. It's kind of like subdivided the acts even more. It is mostly associated with science fiction, fantasy. It's called the hero's journey because the hero goes on, a fantastical or science fiction type journey. But it is also divided into 3 acts and then subdivided from there. It was created by Joseph Campbell. Probably familiar name to you. But Act 1, known as The Departure, The Ordinary World. By the way, when I go through this, you're going to notice a lot of the same things from the 3-act structure that I just went through. And also, when you learn these 3-act structure components for your story, you're going to start noticing it. If you read a book later today, or you watch a movie, or read another screenplay, you're going to start seeing the 3-act structure in other things, and so it'll click and make more sense to you. But anyway, Act 1, The Departure. The Ordinary World, your hero's normal life. Next, we have the Call to Adventure, which is an event that disrupts the ordinary. That leads to refusal of the call, which is the hero hesitates to act and go on the journey. The meeting of the mentor. The hero gets guidance and tools to go on the journey. And then that leads with crossing the threshold, which is the hero enters the special world. That takes you to Act 2, which is initiation, tests, alliances, and enemies. Your hero faces challenges and makes friends or foes. That leads into approach to the inmost cave. The hero prepares for the big challenge. Then you lead to the ordeal, the central crisis, death, rebirth moment for your hero. From there, you go to reward, seizing the sword, which I have a little typo in there. The hero gains the treasure or knowledge. And then you head into the return, which is Act 3. Familiar, Act 3. The road back, journey home begins, resurrection, final climactic test, and then return with the elixir, which is comes back transformed, sharing wisdom. So like I said, you have the 3-act structure, and then Joseph Campbell basically took it and subdivided the 3 acts even further. There is a thing also called the 9-act structure, which is commonly associated with TV movies like Lifetime thrillers, Hallmark romance. It is called the nine act structure specifically because when those movies run on TV, there are commercial breaks. So the end of Act 1 leading into Act 2 is a commercial break. The end of Act 2 leading into Act 3 is another commercial break. And so you have nine different segments. And the reason it's nine acts is specifically because you want something captivating, compelling, intriguing, mysterious, awe inducing to happen at the end of each of those acts so that after the commercial break, the viewer keeps watching the story because every time the story goes to commercial, there's a chance of losing them. They may flip to another channel. They may look at their phone. They may get up and go to the bathroom and not come back. So that's why there's nine acts. And regardless of what your opinion is on Lifetime movies or Hallmark movies, the nine act structure is actually very, very interesting way to think about your feature screenplay that may play at a theater because the concept of every 10 or so pages of your script, you have something compelling or interesting enough to keep the viewer to keep watching. It doesn't just pertain to cable TV movie of the weeks, right? You want compelling things to be happening in your screenplay every 10 or 11 pages so that apathy doesn't set in, so the viewer doesn't get bored, so you don't lose them, right? Um, so I invite you to kind of think about what a nine act structure for your story would be. And think of it that way, like, but the way to think about it is every 10 or so pages you want something really interesting to be happening in your story. One of the problems when you teach or learn about the three act structure is that you have such huge gaps in time. Like Act 1 is 30 pages. That is a lot of real estate in your screenplay. And like a lot of scenes are between 1 and 5 pages. So your first act could be anywhere between 5 and 10 scenes. And so sometimes when people are plotting or outlining their story, they can get grasp the concept of Act One or Act Two or Act Three, but it's really hard on a scene by scene basis for them to figure out like what should go here, what do I want in the story. And Act Two, that's why a lot of people kind of get lost in Act Two. Because you basically have this huge swath of scenes and real estate and blank pages, and you kind of just have the midpoint. And then, like from the start of Act Two, you hit the midpoint like 20 to 30 pages later, and then you hit the low point like about 20 pages or so after that. And there's like, God, you could fit like 30 scenes in there sometimes, or if they're bigger scenes, maybe you fit 10 or 15 scenes. But it's just like a lot, and it's overwhelming for a lot of newer writers because they don't know what's supposed to go in there, what they want to go in there, what is going to be compelling enough to go in there, because they find sometimes that the three act structure is just like way too open. It's like when you go to a grocery store and there's like five different types of cereal to buy. It's too much. Like some people want more structure as opposed to just too many choices. And a lot of newer writers or even experienced writers, they lose their way within their own story sometimes. Um, but we'll go over different examples of stuff like that just to keep you on the track. Um, One of the things with the midpoint to think about is, so if Act One is day to day shit, and then Act Two, like I said, is shit gets real, the midpoint would be that shit gets even more real. Um, and then Act Three, shit gets resolved. So let's kind of talk about what that actually looks like, because these are all like kind of abstract structural concepts. So let's go with the inciting incident, for example. So you have your story. Let's call it a mystery, a murder mystery, for example. Your introduction. So you're going to have a detective or an amateur sleuth. your inciting incident. You have your scene that kind of introduces your sleuth's life, your detective's life. Maybe they are in the first scene solving another case, or they're heading into work and kind of getting an update on the previous day's activity, or it's the detective thing. Sometimes what ends up happening is that someone discovers a body, like someone unrelated to your main character discovers a body, or a murder occurs, but you don't show the killer's face. They just kind of show it off screen, but someone dies, or someone discovers a body in the park or wherever the body gets discovered. So that could be your introduction for your mystery. Your inciting incident is when the detective could be doing whatever at home. Then they get the call from the police chief saying, we got another one. Go over to the park. Go check it out. Or the detective goes into work and the police chief is like, get back in the car, new case right away. Your inciting incident. Boom, new case. The other option, you have a spy movie, right? Introduction. You have your big first kind of action scene. Your spy is finishing off one assignment in the introduction, because that's their kind of like day-to-day life as a spy, is finishing off one assignment. They have kind of like the down moment, the debriefing back at headquarters, and then something else happens, an exciting incident, a new assignment. Like, oh, we just discovered that like a dirty bomb is going to go off in whatever city, or so and so villain just captured something, or we got news that they're about to rob these huge plans or hack the system, right? That could be your inciting incident. Um, in something like a romantic comedy, you can have your meet cute as the introduction. Uh, if you don't know what a meet cute is, it is when the main leads meet each other for the first time. A lot of the time, they don't get along immediately. Like maybe they trip over each other. Maybe one steals the other one's elevator, that kind of thing. But they have that meet cute moment. A lot of time, like I said, they do not get along immediately. But maybe the inciting incident is that the guy, it's his first day at the new company, and he's going to be working with the woman that he's going to end up falling in love with. And that could be your inciting incident. There's a bunch of different ways that you can go with that. In older times, I say older, like as far back maybe like 30 or 40 years ago, which doesn't seem that old to me, you used to have 10, 15 pages of setup, like the day to day life of your character. But with attention spans shifting so much, you want stuff to be happening that is interesting immediately. You do not have the real estate of 10 to 15 pages of just setting up your story anymore. You want your first scene to have at least something compelling going on off the bat. Like when you either, one of the ways to do it is you have your first scene kind of be like the end of a prequel movie. That's the way I would describe it, right? Your first scene would be, just imagine your character's life has a prequel movie, the movie that you're writing, and then a sequel movie, right? The end of the prequel movie would be like the first scene of the movie that you are writing. Okay, and then you kind of debrief, kind of come down from that roller coaster and have a couple of pages of setup before you start your movie. And then you go through your whole movie, you go through the climax, the resolution, and then you kind of show like the first scene of what would be that character's sequel movie. So there's action at the beginning and the end. And when I say action, it doesn't have to be like a big explosive fight scene or whatever, because we're talking about rom coms too. We're talking about mysteries. Not everything's like sci-fi and blah blah blah. But like for example, in a rom com, sometimes like that first scene, it's like your main character gets broken up with. They thought they were gonna get married. They get broken up with, and it's kind of like the end of the prequel of their life story, in their movie. And then you kind of have that. Oh, like now this is my new life, and now I'm single, and I didn't expect it. But then they meet someone new, and that's the start. So that way you have things happening instead of it just being like character wakes up, they make coffee, they get dressed, they go to work, and then all of a sudden like 10 pages has gone by and you've already lost your reader. Um, anyway, so like I said, I am banging on about the first 10 pages because it is that important for not just you and your career, but for the reader to be engaged with your story. I did another video about specifically the first page and the first 10 pages where I'll go into it further. But this is the three act structure video. I'll move on, right? So anyway, you have your day-to-day stuff. You get your inciting incident. Usually what happens is the main character doesn't want their life to change sometimes. There's a resistance to it. Um, like maybe they're a detective and they don't want this case. They just finished a case and they want to take a break. Or the spy is like, give it to someone else because, it seems like an unwinnable assignment. So there's a reluctance. But here's the thing, that reluctance tends to be very, very quick. Like it's the end, like the end of one scene is like, I don't know about that. And like literally they cut to the next scene and then like they show up to the plane to take them to the Middle East or to Asia or whatever to start their case. Or the detective might be like, I don't know about that, and like the next scene is them pulling right up to the crime scene. You see that all the time in movies. Like once you start kind of noticing that, there's kind of like a reluctance to kind of go for it. For example, too, if it's like a rom com, a lot of times um, you'll hit your inciting incident, and then they're like, "Oh, I don't know if I want to go out with that guy," and then like the next scene, they're getting dressed or getting picked up for the date. Um, but the end of Act One, basically, one thing to think about with the three act structure is your main character slash protagonist, or if you have an ensemble, your main characters, they're gonna have wants and needs and goals, and then a weakness. And so, in order to achieve their goals or achieve their dreams, they're going to have to take steps. And the end of Act One is when they're like, no, like, let's make this happen. Here it is. Like, here's the journey. I'm going on the journey to change my life, to find the love of my life, or to stop the world from ending, or to stop an evil empire, or to slay the evil troll. That's the end of Act One. They're like, no, we're doing this. My life has been. I had my day-to-day life. My life got shaken up, and now it's on. It is on. We're doing this. So that is that moment at the end of Act One, which takes you into Act Two. Sometimes, for example, though, if you have like an everyman character, sometimes their wants and goals is just they want their life back. They want their old life back. They want their life to stay the same. And sometimes they have to go on a journey just to get back what they once had. Anyway, you get in Act Two. It is very, very long act. Like I said, it's easy to get lost in the murky waters of Act Two, which is why if you think about having uh, kind of like a mini commercial break every 10 pages, it's easier to split up your plot so it's not so daunting and you demystify the process of the plot. One of the things that can be also very helpful is the idea of having sequences in your story. So, like, a lot of times movies have set pieces, and the reason they have set pieces is because sets are very expensive to build. And so, you instead of having like one scene, which is like 3 or 4 pages, take place in a location, they build an entire set. And so, a sequence or a set piece takes place over like 3 or 4 kind of scenes all in that one general area, and it takes up 10 pages. So then you don't have to use like 30 locations, one for each scene. Maybe you only have 4 or 5 set pieces where you have a number of mini scenes. Like, for example, you could have a set piece that takes place in an office building, but like one of the scenes could be in the conference room, one of them could be in a corner office, one could be in like the reception area, one could be in the bathroom. You could also have a set piece that kind of takes place at like an amusement park where there's stuff at the ticketing area. There's something in like the roller coaster area. So like you only have to get like one general-ish location, and you can have 4 or 5 scenes there. You can also have it be even simpler. You can have a set piece or sequence that all takes place at a person's house, but some of it's on the front step, some of it's in the kitchen, some of it's in the bathroom. So like you can do it that way, but if you divide up your script that way, instead of being like, oh, I got like 90 to 120 pages, I got like 35 scenes. If you think, oh no, like I have this whole sequence of scenes at this house. I have this whole sequence of scenes. Like, for example, a first date is a perfect sequence. Because usually you have the person pick the person up at the house. They drive somewhere, so that's a second scene. They go to a restaurant, so that's a third scene in that sequence. Maybe they get to a movie, so that's a fourth scene in that sequence. Maybe they get ice cream after the movie and talk about the movie. That's like a fifth, and then drop off at home, and then maybe it leads to making out and then having sex. So, that sequence is like 6 scenes, but it's really just one date. But it's easier to plot and kind of demystify the process of your story. So instead of being like, oh, I gotta do like 8 or 9 hundred fucking scenes. But back to it. So when you're in Act Two, things are just getting really, really rough for your protagonist. They're hitting obstacle after obstacle after obstacle. The other thing to think about with the three-act structure is there's always going to be some form of an antagonist in your story. I say antagonist instead of villain because not all stories have a villain. But all stories do have an antagonist. Sometimes the antagonist could be nature. It could be the universe itself. Like if you're doing a love story, sometimes the antagonist is just the universe is not giving you the love, the kind of dating options that you want. Other times it's something very specific, like an actual villain, or it's like a renegade werewolf, or it's an alien, or it's like a robot army. Sometimes, if it's a movie about hurricanes, like the antagonist is not a villain, but the antagonist is Mother Nature. So you have to think about it like that because the antagonist will be constantly throwing obstacles at your protagonist, making their life harder, making it difficult for them to achieve their goals and finally win out. So that's be constantly thinking about what the antagonist can throw in front of your protagonist to make their life harder. So the midpoint, which makes it very interesting, is your protagonist is already going through a lot of shit. At the midpoint, something big happens and it kind of turns the screenplay. I don't know if you've seen the movie Gremlins. It's a perfect example of this. The plot is basically very simple. Through most of the movie, there is one gremlin that the protagonist is trying to stop, right? One. I don't want to go into super specifics, but like when a gremlin gets wet, they turn into more. They get more and more gremlins. And so at the midpoint of Gremlins, that gremlin, the one singular antagonist, gets wet, and then all of a sudden there's 50 gremlins that they have to take on to stop them. And so like that is your midpoint where things get even realer. In a detective kind of story, your midpoint sometimes is they're working on this case, they think they're getting somewhere, and then at the midpoint, like a second murder will occur. And they're like, uh-oh, because in the detective world, if a second murder, like if one murder occurs, maybe it's like a one-off, and yeah, you want to catch the killer, but it's an isolated incident. If you have a second murder, and if the MO, which is the modus operandi, is different than the first one, then maybe you're dealing with a different killer. Or maybe sometimes the second murder occurs and you realize there's a chance that it becomes a serial killer, which is huge not just for the detective, but for the mayor of whatever city or town or the police chief because they do not want public panic. And a second murder can set off the thought that it would be a serial killer. Also, that the killer is not done because sometimes someone kills once. And then they stop. But if they're doing it twice, there's a chance they'll do it 3 or 4 times, and there's no stopping it until you actually catch the person. So that midpoint can happen sometimes where a second murder occurs. Or the other option is that the detective finds out something about the case that someone they know personally might have information about the case that was withheld. Maybe someone in the department has been helping the killer, that kind of thing. Maybe someone in the department is the killer. Like, but the story gets much, much larger at the midpoint. In the midpoint, sometimes of romantic comedies. So, like the end of Act One. A lot of the times, the end of Act One in a romantic comedy is when the couple starts dating. The midpoint, sometimes what happens is the couple has their first big fight, or their first big argument, or sometimes the midpoint is that one of the people in the couple admits that they love the other one, and maybe the other one is not quite in love yet. Or maybe one person says, I love you, and the other person's commitment phobic, and it triggers them. But things expand and get realer at that midpoint. And then you start hurdling toward the end of Act Two, which is the low point, kind of like the point of despair for your character, where it seems like they're going to fail whatever their journey, whatever their mission is. Like the spy, it seems like they're not going to get to the dirty bomb in time. It seems like the villain's going to win. In a fantasy, like maybe the huge troll or orc king is going to defeat our hero. In a sci-fi, like maybe that's like where the aliens look like they're going to not just invade, because they probably haven't invaded, but like where the aliens are going to destroy Earth. In a more simple kind of romantic comedy, it would be like the couple breaks up and it looks like it's over for their romance. In a detective story, your low point end of Act Two is it looks like the detective's not going to be able to find the killer. The killer is going to get away with murder, and that's going to be the end of it. Okay, so there's always that kind of moment where it seems like our protagonist or ensemble protagonists are going to fail. But then you go into Act Three, the resolution. Shit gets resolved, where something happens, like a reveal or a clue, or the hero finds a way to come out on top, and they have a big climactic showdown. So, like, the spy would face off against the villain, and they have a big clash. Or an action movie or superhero movie, they fight off with the villain. Or in a horror movie, like your hero fights off the big creature, the big demonic force. In a detective movie, like the climax is when the detective finally tracks down the killer, or they finally uncover the piece of evidence they need and confront the killer to get a confession and arrest them. In a romantic comedy, your climax is going to be, usually it's like the running in the street at night or running in an airport terminal. Like, I made a huge mistake, and then they give this huge speech, like, I want you back. I can't imagine my life without you. So you have this big swelling climactic moment where your hero overcomes and they win, unless it's one of those movies where the hero loses. But in most movies, the hero wins. And then you have like your falling action, new equilibrium. It's kind of like your wrap up. You have this huge like emotional victory or just huge poignant moment. And then you don't want to end the movie right away. You just kind of want to have a little bit of resolution. Like, what does it look like after victory? Maybe they're cheering. Maybe they're like, good work on the case. Maybe there's a big kiss, all that kind of good stuff. So you have that thing. And then the new equilibrium kind of moment would be basically like the first scene in a sequel movie where it's like, what does this new life look like? Maybe the spy, after a hard fought victory, finally takes a vacation, or maybe they get assigned another case just like right away. Same with the detective. Maybe they finally get to take a couple days off, and that's your new equilibrium. Or they just get an immediate call and be like, "There's been another murder." With a romantic comedy or a comedy, we're back together, and you kind of have that scene. Maybe it's like a week later or 6 months later. Maybe there's a quick scene where you're like, 6 months later, we get married, stuff like that. So it's like, what does their new life look like after achieving their goals? So there's your 3 act structure, your hero's journey, also kind of your 9 act structure. Your 9 act structure still is the 3 act structure, but it's just subdivided for more commercial breaks. But think about it like that. What can you write in terms of sequences or every 10 pages to keep a viewer engaged every 10 minutes?